Alright, welcome back to episode 4 of Swarzo History. This one's about my song Victory, which is about the last major Greek victories of the Greco-Persian Wars. So the Greco-Persian Wars are basically two big Persian invasions of Greece. So the first one was actually initiated by King Darius of Persia, the Emperor of Persia, and it was kind of like a punitive campaign against Athens because the Athenians had been kind of instigating rebellions in Persian sphere of influence, and he lost. So, you've probably heard about the Battle of Marathon. That was like the big battle of that first invasion where the Athenians beat back the Persians. But when Darius's son Xerxes took power, he kind of made it his thing to be the guy who would go back and succeed where his father failed. So Xerxes is going to be the Persian king who conquers Greece. And in the last episode of this series, I talked about the Battle of Thermopylae, and while the Battle of Thermopylae was going on, the Battle of Artemisium, a naval battle, was also happening in the same area. And those were Persian victories. And after those victories, the Greeks are kind of in a panic, and they retreat and they reorganize around the area of Salamis off the coast of Attica nearby Athens. And the Persians basically own Attica at this point, and there's a big fight on the Acropolis at Athens, which does not go very well. The Athenians evacuate Athens and get all their people out of there and go meet up with the rest of the Greek fleet at Salamis. So our source for all of this stuff and what I'm going to talk about is once again Herodotus, and this is book 8 and book 9. So with the Greek fleet regrouped at Salamis, the point I brought up in the last episode about the Greeks having a lot of practice fighting each other comes up again, because the Greeks did not get along very well at all during this, and it was a major effort to get them to cooperate and fight against the Persians. So with Athens burning and the rest of Attica pretty much owned by Persia, all of the Greeks from the Peloponnese really want to just ditch Attica and go to the Isthmus and get ready to defend their cities, which have not yet been conquered or attacked. Athens doesn't want them to do that. They want them to stay and help out at Salamis. And basically what happens is Themistocles, a major Athenian guy who actually was instrumental in building the Athenian navy, he sends a guy out in the middle of the night to the Persians and convinces them to surround the Greek force. So he basically allows the Persians to surround them all so that the Greeks have no choice but to stay and fight together instead of a bulk of the fleet running off and looking after their own cities. Long story short, the Greek fleet wins at Salamis, and it's a major disaster for the Persians. Xerxes freaks out because with his fleet in disarray, he's worried that the Greeks will race him back to the Hellespont where he crossed over into Europe and destroy the bridges he made there, and then Xerxes won't be able to go home and he'll get cut off, surrounded, and defeated. So he decides to run away, but one of his guys, Mardonius, says, "You run away, leave me with 300,000 guys, and we'll go towards the Peloponnese, and we'll try to conquer the Peloponnese while you're gone." And Xerxes agrees. The Greeks more or less decide not to pursue Xerxes while he runs away, and the Peloponnesians set about getting ready to defend their section of Greece at the Isthmus, and they build a wall there. eventually this culminates in a battle around the isthmus at a place called Plataea, where a big Greek force, which Herodotus says numbered about 110,000 people, of which 38,700 were hoplites, and the rest were all lightly armored troops. Meanwhile, Mardonius has that 300,000 guys. After a while, the armies end up facing off around Plataea, and there's a standoff that lasts like 2 weeks, where nobody wants to attack because both sides have been praying and getting omens saying that they need to stay on the defensive. And, you know, the Persians get sick of waiting and Mardonius decides to go on the offensive. But while the Persian cavalry is kind of harassing the Greek army, there's this attempt by the Greeks to maneuver this huge army down towards Temple of Hera at the town of Plataea itself. So a huge chunk of the Greek army ends up leaving to go there. There's a fight within the Spartan contingent about whether we should be retreating or, you know, whether it's more honorable to stick around. So they hang around a lot longer than they should. The Athenians kind of stick around to be like, are you coming? Are you staying? What's going on? Eventually the Spartans start moving and the Athenians do as well. But by that point, the Persians kind of think that the Greeks are all running away. So Mardonius launches this big disorganized attack. So the Spartans are cut off on their own. The Athenians are also cut off on their own. The Spartans are facing a lot of Persians and other non-Greeks. The Athenians are facing off against Greek collaborators who are actually working with the Persians. So Spartans are cut off fighting on their own. Athenians are cut off fighting on their own. They can't give up and help each other without being annihilated. And the rest of the Greek army is off at the Temple of Hera, a ways away, waiting for these guys to show up, and they don't really know what's happening. So around a sanctuary of Demeter is where the Spartans hold out, and they maul the Persians, basically. There's an episode where Pausanias, the Spartan leader, is trying to get good omens before he attacks. He eventually gets his good omens. He attacks. Once again, Herodotus says, you know, both sides fought bravely, but the Spartan equipment and expertise just couldn't be beaten by the Persians, who didn't really have armor. And that battle ends pretty quick, with Mardonius being killed, and the bulk of the force ends up running away in terror. Meanwhile, the Athenian fight lasts a little bit longer because it's Greeks on Greeks, but it's also a pretty stiff fight because the Greek collaborators don't want to just give up and run away, because they've been collaborating with the Persians, so they stick it out until the death, and they basically get wiped out. So after these two separate mini battles end, the bulk of the Greek force over at the Temple of Hera gets the news that there was a fight and the Persians are running away, and they all decide to jump in, and it turns into a massive, brutal rout where thousands of Persians are running for their lives, and the Greek forces are just hunting them down, basically. The Persians actually had constructed like this wooden fortress, and they did retreat to it, but all the Greeks set on that fortress, break in, and there's this huge massacre. I think Herodotus says like 3,000 of the Persian army survive it, and that's not counting like he says 40,000 guys that retreated early. But all the Persians who stuck around and fought at Plataea basically get massacred here. So once again, these two battles kind of have a fame to them where it's seen as Greeks beating back the Persians and stopping the invasion. Obviously, we know that it's more nuanced than that, that the Greek forces were in danger of falling apart at any given time because of how much they hated each other. There was a lot of fighting between them about who was doing better and who had contributed more during the invasion, and this stuff continues on into the Peloponnesian War, which is a lot of the rest of the album. But it's the Greeks arguing about who did what and who did better during the Persian Wars. But I wanted to make the song Victory like an optimistic song, so I focused on the fact that all these groups that usually hate each other, and they basically did hate each other here, ended up cooperating, even if unwillingly or grudgingly. They cooperated in the face of this foreign external threat and ended up beating it back. Obviously, in a song that I'm trying to be optimistic, I'm not talking about collaborators, Greek collaborators, and I'm glossing over a lot of the internal division and bickering. That's because I wanted an optimistic song. So it's kind of like a hopeful song, and I wanted it to be, again, from the perspective of someone who experienced it or experienced the news, you know, like learning that after all this stuff happened, these Greek forces came together and drove back this massive foreign invasion. And it's this moment of everyone take a breath. We just pulled off something really spectacular. Everyone's in a good mood. I can't believe we pulled this off. So that's kind of how I want the mood of the song to be. And I feel like I did a good job. It's a pretty optimistic song in my opinion. But of course, being as it is ancient Greece, that moment of cooperation does not last very long, and things quickly descend into, you know, interstate warfare again, where we get something called the Peloponnesian War, which is what most of the rest of Odyssey is about. So pretty much all of the rest of the songs on Odyssey, except for the very last one, are going to be about events in the Peloponnesian War, where the Greeks are back at fighting each other and not an external force. So next week, or whenever I make it, I'll be talking about the next song on the album, which is The Plague. So I'll see you then. Bye.